Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to welcome you into the webinar today where we're going to spend some time talking about what we call the AutoWriter basics. What we really mean by that is we're going to look at the main AutoWriter screen, our main point of sale module, as well as just work our way through a very basic transaction start to finish. Let's start out with talking about the main screen before we get into how we actually navigate and work our way through it. As you're looking at my main screen, and this is the main AutoWriter window, I call this the AutoWriter dashboard. And in this, we break it up into 4 separate pieces, starting with the AutoWriter toolbar, or the Service Writer toolbar here across the top, which starts with the icon that says History in the upper left-hand corner, works its way over to the right-hand side to the icon that says Post AP on the far right. Now, there are some configurable options as it relates to these icons up here. We're going to talk about those after we finish our introduction to the screen itself. So we'll come back and talk about the Service Writer toolbar a bit after we finish up with the general introduction. Down the left-hand side, we've got what's called our Quick Launch toolbar. In my case, split up into 2 separate sections. The upper section says Catalogs are all integrations to other catalog vendors and or third-party providers that AutoWriter will integrate with. Now, there are actually about 14 different icons that you can have listed up here in the upper left-hand corner. We've got a handful of the ones that are used most prevalently as we go through, but as you look through the list, for example, SmartyCat is our integration that uses the Epicor catalog data to check parts pricing and availability through local vendors. If you're using just the Epicor integration and looking at either service or catalog data, a link to the old LaserCat catalog. If you're using diagnostic and repair tools such as ALLDATA and or Identifix, we have integrations available into those tools as well. And then down beneath, just some of the different parts companies that we integrate with. In this case, I've got both WorldPac and Napa, and then a third-party vendor called NextPart that will help to facilitate connections to part suppliers as well. So in the upper left-hand corner, underneath my Quick Launch toolbar, the first section is where I'm going to find my catalogs icon. And again, the catalogs that are there are user-definable, and the ones that are available are part of your AutoWriter license. So the ones that we can include, also some configurable settings as far as that's concerned as well. The second section in my Quick Launch toolbar is just called Quick Launch because these are other modules of the AutoWriter Shop Management System. Our purpose today is to mainly talk about point of sale, but also we've got all of these other links or other icons that are part of the AutoWriter Shop Management System. So as we jump around a bit, primarily today into the configuration module, we'll use our link that's in our Quick Launch toolbar to take us into that other module of the AutoWriter Shop Management System. So as I look at this window, Section 1 is the Service Writer toolbar across the top, Section 2, the Quick Launch toolbar down the right-hand side, and in my case, Sections 3 and 4 in the center, my Estimates in Progress window and my Work in Progress window. In AutoWriter, a ticket can go through 3 separate stages in its life cycle. Starts out as an estimate. So the customer's brought the vehicle to the repair facility. We're going to diagnose what's wrong and we're going to present them with an estimate. So again, my Estimates in Progress window at the top is reflective of the cars that have been brought to us, but we haven't yet necessarily sold the job. We haven't been given the approval by the customer to do the work. Once we're given that approval, we'll convert it from an estimate down to a work in progress. So down here at the bottom, my Work in Progress window, so again, we've gotten the approval from the customer, we've defined the scope of work, and so now we're going to go ahead and get the repair done. So while we're doing that, it sits in our Work in Progress window. The third stage in a ticket's life cycle is when we would finalize the transaction and it would end up in history, meaning I don't see those finalized transactions on the screen all the time. Where I'd find those is to my upper left-hand corner, back to my Service Writer toolbar through that history icon in the upper left-hand corner. So 4 separate sections to my window, again starting with my Service Writer toolbar, my Quick Launch toolbar, and then my Estimates in Progress and Work in Progress window. And again, each of these have a certain degree of customization that can be applied. So let's go back and loop back around to each and talk about the different options that are available in order to kind of massage and or change the look and feel. Starting with our Service Writer toolbar across the top of the screen, most of these icons are static, meaning there isn't too much that we can do to change those. However, if I go down to Configuration, in the Configuration menu, underneath File, if I go down to General Options, I'll bring up my General Options window. When I do, it'll ask me for my password, and once I've entered that password, Now it brings me into my general options window. Most of the settings in general options are per terminal, meaning if we're going to make a change, and I want that change to be impactful on all of the different computers, we're going to have to walk from computer to computer and make those changes. We do that intentionally because, for example, if I have a computer out in the back shop where the guys are working, I may not want them to have the ability to create a new repair order or start a new estimate. So I can take both of those icons off of the screen. I could add on icons in addition to new RO and new estimate, but also if I do a lot of over-the-counter part sales or just a parts invoice and or a parts estimate. The difference between the two really is with an over-the-counter part sale, no labor component and no required vehicle. So it just wants to know what customer we sold the part to and then also what part was sold, not how much labor did we charge and or what vehicle is this part being installed on. So again, parts estimates and or parts invoices, we can add additional icons up there at the top. If I'm not utilizing accounts payable, I may not have that post AP icon up there in the far upper right-hand corner. So as we look at the options that we have as far as the main toolbar is concerned, we're really talking about the ability to turn on or off 5 different icons. And if we're using post accounts payable, whether we're doing it in detail and or in summary. So in my case, the only one I had turned on was the new estimate button on the left-hand column. And then also I am using accounts payable, so I'll give that shortcut or that link to go ahead and post my accounts payable out there on the far right-hand side. Those are the different options that we have available. One other button that's there, it says custom toolbar buttons. If I was to click on that icon there, what you'll notice is there's actually 3 different custom toolbar buttons that we could add out there to the far right-hand side. Again, that's the limitation, the number of slots that you have available. If I was to look at a custom toolbar button, what I would do is I would click on Edit, and what I can tell the system to do is to show the button. Here's the program that I want it to run. So if I wanted to link to something else inside of my program, I will just have to tell it that here is the button that we're looking at, the program that we're going to use, as well as if there was a caption, tooltip, window title, or specific icon that we wanted to use when that appears. So what that would actually do is it would throw up to 3 additional icons out here to the right-hand side. Again, looking for an executable locally that it's going to launch if you wanted to have that ability to do that directly from inside your point of sale. So again, as far as the top toolbar is concerned, you've got a handful of different configurable options, most turning on and or off certain icons. As far as things like Quick Part, the calendar, the scheduler notes, those are icons that will just appear by default. No way to turn those on and or off. They're just in there as part of the program. Down the left-hand side, where it says Catalogs and then it says Quick Launch, again, if I was to go back into my General Options window, we'll see here at the top where it says Toolbar Settings, this section over on the right-hand side is going to define what icons are present in that Quick Launch section. Again, maybe I've got that computer in the back shop where I don't want the shortcuts to accounts receivable, accounts payable, the accounting interface, the word processor, the marketing and follow-up piece. And so what I can do is I can turn those icons off. And then again, what you'll see down the left-hand side once we we close and reopen our writer is that the icons will go away. They won't be available to be launched through our Quick Launch toolbar. Depending on your license, meaning which catalog integrations you have, a number of other icons that we could include up there in the upper left-hand corner as well. So again, all of those different options available to me in order to turn them on or off on my Quick Launch toolbar, and again, driven by whether or not they are part of our RWriter license. If we're not licensed for accounts payable, then I wouldn't be able to turn that icon on. If we're not licensed for the marketing and follow-up module, again, that option just not available, just based upon the license itself. Once I'm licensed for a feature, though, then I have the ability to define whether it gets turned on and or off on that left-hand side Quick Launch toolbar. I'm going to go ahead and get out of configuration for a moment, back over to RWriter, because as we're talking about configurability of the main screen, again, the top toolbar, the side toolbar, my Service Writer toolbar, and my Quick Launch toolbar controlled in configuration. The Estimates in Progress window and the Work in Progress window controlled directly from this screen here. Anywhere in the center, I'm going to go ahead and just right-click. When I right-click on that, it's going to take me into the configuration screen for my Estimates in Progress window. What we'll notice is there's about 15 or so columns that I can have included in my in my estimates in progress screen. If I'm not using, let's say for example, we're not using a service advisor, I can uncheck that column. If I didn't want to see the number of hours, the primary tech, the original repair order number, I could turn those off, and as I click on set, you'll notice that my column set is much shorter. I don't have quite the same number turned on and or off. So if I was to right click again and then come back and turn those back on, again you'll see it start to expand because now we've got a few more columns that it needs to accommodate. So the columns that appear is the first thing we can configure inside of this window here. So I turn the columns on and or off. Before we get to some of our filter parameters, the other thing I can do is I can define not only the width of a column, but also the sequence of the columns. So if, say, for example, I said, well, I needed a little bit more real estate to see the customer's name, when I hover over the right-hand side and I stretch that out just a little bit, now it allows and or allocates a little more real estate for that particular column. If I wanted the phone number to be behind the customer name, if I left-click and hold, then what I could do is I could drag that along, and once I release, now whichever column I am behind as I release is where it then gets put in position. So I have the ability to define not only what columns appear, the width of those columns, and then the sequence of those columns as well. So we do all that just from here right inside of the main screen. I'm going to right click on my window again, because the other thing that we can do is we can define whether or not we see the search and filters window. And what that's all about is up here at the top, you've got this section which is going to allow me to do searches and or filters on my estimates in progress window, whether or not that bar appears, driven by my checkbox there. Again, what it does is it opens up a little bit more real estate. I can see maybe 3 or 4 additional lines on the screen at any given point in time. I come back and go to my set search and filters window. Again, now I get my filter criteria box, pardon me, back. So there's a couple of different ways we can use these search and filters. The first is just to do an ad hoc search and or filter. For example, if I said, well, I'm looking for the estimate that is written for my customer Adam Olson, I'll use that search box in the upper left-hand corner. Now in my case, I only have 14 estimates that are currently in progress, so therefore being able to search through the list, not that cumbersome. But if I had 100 or 1,000 estimates in progress, whatever the number is, being able to use the search functionality to find one relatively quickly can certainly help to stop a lot of scrolling up and down, left and right, as we're looking for a particular transaction. So you've got your search functionality. We also have the ability to filter the estimates to say I'm only looking for all estimates in today's appointments, or appointments plus and minus 1 day from today, and or today's estimates and appointments. In my case, all of my customers came in a little while ago, so any of these filter parameters are going to eliminate a fair degree of the different transactions that are there. But that's what we're looking towards is, do you have an appointment scheduled for today? Was it started today? And or was the appointment plus or minus 1 day from today? And or was it just started today? And or the appointment for today? So filter criteria over on the left-hand side, as well as if I wanted to filter by service writer, profit center, and or status, I could do that as well. Last filter criteria that's there is for my promise window, where I could say I'd like all of the transactions that were promised between this time and this time. So if I'm just looking for the ones that have been promised to be done by the end of the day, then we could use that as our filter criteria as well. I'm going to right click on this one more time, because what I could do is I could establish a filter parameter and not have to go through and apply it ad hoc each time. So I'm only looking for the transactions that were done by Andy Adams. What I did was I went in and I turned off or unchecked Earl Jones. When I click on set, what we'll see is there is only one estimate currently assigned to Andy Adams as the service writer. My estimates in progress window now filtered to show 1 of 14 transactions, because again, that's the only one set to show Andy. Now if I came back in here to my filter criteria, I could turn that back and I could turn Earl back on, and now I can see Earl as well. And again, if I went back and looked at my set, you'll see that my default is to just show Andy. However, I have just now made the ad hoc change to show both Andy and Earl. We'll turn that back to just show all of my service writers. So all I do is just click Earl again and hit set, and now we should see all 14 of my transactions, whether it's assigned to a service advisor or not. Once I'm done making modifications to my window, I've added some columns, I've changed the sort order, I've expanded or shrunk the columns down, I've set a filter parameter. What we want to do is we want to save the changes that we've made. So if I come back up here to the very top of my screen where it says Windows, underneath Windows, the very last option says Work in Progress Settings. And when I go to Work in Progress Settings, I'm going to save this as my default. So when I click on Save as my defaults, what that does is it says I'm going to remember the width of the column, the sequence of the columns that were turned on and or off. So if I came in here and I turned off a bunch of additional columns, and or maybe I accidentally closed this window, and I moved this column from the last position up towards the front, and my screen doesn't look like it should. If I come back up here to where it says Windows, Work in Progress Settings, just tell it to use my defaults. What it says is, well, I remember these columns were turned on, here was the sequence, these windows were both open, they had this much real estate allocated. So again, saving it as your defaults will save you the necessity of having to go through and redo that customization time and again. It remembers exactly where everything was the last time you told it to save as my defaults. The rest of it's in progress. We have our Work in Progress window. They behave very similarly, meaning if I wanted to show my column set down here, I could right click, I could turn my columns on and or off, apply my filters. No difference there. The main difference between the two is this button up here towards the upper left hand corner that says Status. Notice that button does not appear over here in the Estimates in Progress window, but as I'm looking through my work in progress of my 9 transactions, I've got 4 of them that are finished. One's on hold, one we're waiting on parts, one we're waiting on the customer, and then 2 more where it's in process. So if all of a sudden we had finished up this last transaction, if I highlight it, so all I do is click on it once, now it's highlighted in blue, and I click the status icon in the upper left hand corner. I can now go back up to the top and tell it that this one has been finished, and now I can see my status get changed. It's the equivalent of a shortcut of if I opened up the transaction itself, went to the Other Information tab, clicked on Change Status, scrolled up through my list to Finished, clicked on OK, then closed out of the transaction. Again, does the exact same thing. Much quicker to do it right here from the Work in Progress screen, where all I do is left-click once to highlight, and then whichever one's highlighted is where we're going to change that status. Other than that, the 2 windows are relatively similar, almost identical, I would say, as we go through. A couple last tips or tricks as we go through and talk about these windows here. Up at the very top, we've got File, Quick Function, Windows, and then Help. I wouldn't tell you that I think you'll use File very often. This is essentially just other links to the icons that are directly beneath. Under Quick Functions, again, you may or may not use most of these icons here. However, the time clock and the daily summary are icons that are unique only underneath this Quick Functions menu. Again, Quick Part Calculator, Notes, and Post AP are right out there to the right-hand side. However, if I'm using the time clock, again, you'll see my keyboard shortcut is Control-J, or under Quick Functions, we'll bring up that Quick Functions piece. Under the Quick Functions, again, the daily summary, your shortcut on the keyboard is the F7, but the daily summary is just a very quick way to see, well, where are we, at least for the day as far as we're concerned. Right now, I've got 9 open repair orders. That's my 9 down here in my work in progress, with a total based upon the sum total of each transaction of just under $3,200. And then based upon the individual statuses, 6 are finished. I've got 1 that's on hold. I've got 1 where we're waiting on the customer and 1 that we're waiting on the part. So again, my daily summary available up there through that Quick Functions piece in the very top upper left-hand corner. I'm going to go ahead and close out of here as we continue on. Underneath Windows, Windows will let us define whether we're using what we call job-based repair orders or not. In my case, if I was to open up one of my transactions, and in this case, we'll look at Kathy and her 96 Honda Accord. It's an on-hold transaction, but as we look, we've got our part, and we have our labor, and then we have our part. They are associated together in what we call a job-based format. If I was to uncheck the box where it says job-based repair orders and open that transaction again, what we'll find is that the window split left and right. Parts versus labor. No association between the two, but now I'm just going to list out, here is the labor, here are the parts. So you have the ability to define whether you're using what's called job-based and or non-job-based repair orders as we're looking at the screen. In my case, my preference is to use the job-based repair orders. We'll leave those turned on, and as we look at some of the other options here, they're also going to define what happens with our main screen. If we're hiding that toolbar simply based upon the amount of real estate that we have on our monitor, then we can have the system auto-hide the toolbar. We can hide the parts and labor cost and or hide package discounts. So if you're using package discounts, turning that on will not display those discounts anywhere but on the calculations tab as far as a package discount is concerned. The hide parts and labor cost will just suppress it from the edit part and edit labor window. It won't suppress the subtotal of the cost from the calculations window, but it will suppress it from the individual part and labor. At the bottom, we talked about work in progress settings, but we also have tile horizontally, vertically, cascade, and then arrange icons. You figure these are just windows within windows. If I said to tile them vertically, then now what it does is it splits my windows and they're now left and right. Not quite as much real estate going back and forth. However, a lot more real estate in order to see the windows as they are. So you see the list of items here as opposed to seeing maybe 15. As in the other view, I can probably now see the better part of 35 to 40 just listed inside of my transactions. We can also full screen these windows. So if I was to hit the maximize button on one of those, now I'm just looking at my work in progress window. My status goes all the way to the very top where it says it's my work in progress 9 of 9 and a total of 10.1 hours. If I wanted to see my estimates window, that's what these two icons are here for, to bring focus to either one of those. So there's my estimates window, 14 out of 14, 9.62 hours, and again, moving back one versus the other, work in progress and or estimates in progress. Move my screen back where it belongs, or where I had it as we started. I'm going to use my defaults, and now it's estimates on top of work in progress. As we're looking the fourth icon over, it's how we would actually work our way through a transaction, getting something into my estimates window, getting it from the estimates window to the work in progress window, and then finally sending a customer on their way. So we're going to start that process. We'll click on New EST. As we bring up the new EST window, it says we want to search our existing database to see whether or not a customer and or vehicle has ever been in to see us before. So that's, we search either by customer or we search by vehicle. In our case, we'll search for the customer's last name. And in my case, this customer hasn't ever been in to see us before. So by default, the option is to add a new customer into the system. If we go ahead and do a new customer, we'll give them a name. We'll put in an address. And also we'll define the city, state, and zip. As we continue through the edit customer window, we have up to 6 different phone numbers that you can capture in regards to any one individual customer. If you notice, they are all lit up in red down the left-hand side. It is a configurable parameter as to whether or not we require a phone number. What you'll watch is, as I'm giving him a phone number, as soon as I get to 7 characters in any one of these fields, it says we have satisfied the requirement of capturing a phone number. It doesn't want 7 characters in all 6 fields. It just wants a minimum of 1 phone number. If we're using email to communicate to our customers, we may want to go ahead and capture an email for him as well. As far as email is concerned, what you'll notice is as I type, it's johnbarlow@yahoo.com, and as I type, when I finally get to .co, then it lights up these boxes out here to the right-hand side because it says that looks like a valid email address, meaning a valid email address is something at something dot something. So that would appear to fit that convention. So we've got johnbarlow@yahoo.com. I will allow you to send. If I don't want this used for marketing and follow-up purposes, I would uncheck that box. It would still keep the email on file for me to send potentially an estimate, repair order, or final invoice copy. We put in the customer information. I'll click on OK, and we get into the Edit Vehicle window. It's a new customer, so therefore we must be adding in a new vehicle. When you add the vehicle, there's really 3 different ways to go about adding the vehicle. If I said that it was a 2004 Ford Taurus, I could type in my year, hit the F key on the keyboard to bring up my make, hit the T key on the keyboard to bring up my model, and then when I get down to my engine size, either use the drop-down box and or the up and down arrows to highlight one engine or the other. So not uncommon that we'll put in year, make, model, and engine, maybe based on our customer's recommendation or what we can physically see. through the window. Before we go ahead and we work on the vehicle itself, we'll probably want to validate it through either the VIN number and or using the license plate. Meaning if you've got the VIN number, we can type the VIN in there, and then utilizing the Epicor integration, we can use this icon to the right-hand side to do year, make, model, and engine. Again, you do need to use the Epicor catalog to use the VIN decoding piece. We also have an integration through Carfax that would allow us to put in a license plate. So if I put in 194YSH, make sure the state is accurate, and hit VIN lookup, what it does is it'll reach out to Carfax and it says, well, we're looking at the VIN number that's registered to that vehicle along with the year, make, and model. It asks me to verify, and again, it does appear based upon a quick visual check that that's our vehicle. So we'll click on yes, and now it's going to populate year, make, model, and engine from the license plate. Again, that functionality going through Carfax in order to get that information. If I wanted, I could populate a submodel, the transmission used for notation purposes as we print a document, and down to the lower left, we're going to enter in a mileage. They've got 112,358 miles on that 2008 Nissan Altima. So we've added in the vehicle information as well, in this case validating the year, make, model, and engine through the license plate and Carfax, and using the Epicor VIN decoding piece to do all of that validation. On the right-hand side, we've got some other information that we may or may not want to enter about the vehicle. When I talk about this window, I typically say that the left-hand side is very important. I don't want to order a part, estimate a job without verifying the year, make, model, and engine. The right-hand side might be important. What I mean by that is, if you're doing aftermarket state inspections, it may be important to your shop that you capture the last time an inspection was done on that vehicle, so we can make sure we're following up or reminding customers when that next inspection might be due. In my case, I want to keep track of the color, if it's got locking hubcaps or four-wheel drive, so I've got fields that I've defined for that purpose. You have the ability to configure what those are looking for over on the configuration side in the Edit Vehicles window. Down here at the bottom, if I do a lot of fleet work, then I might want to capture the fleet unit number. If I'm searching for a vehicle and it's using the fleet unit number parameter, that's where the value lives. And the last one that's down there in my vehicle window is the barcode. We do support what I call a customer loyalty program, meaning if you go into a Walgreens or a CVS, they'll give you a little plastic thing you put on your key tag that's got a UPC code on it that's tied to you as a customer. And each time they walk in, they'll scan that, and then that way they're counting and giving you points and or benefits just based upon the frequency and the number of dollars you're spending with that particular CVS or Walgreens. Same concept, if we wanted to have a key tag that had a UPC code on it, we could put that on each key ring as it came through the door, and then as the customer came back in for a future visit, we scan that customer loyalty card that's on their keychain, and it will immediately bring us right up to the customer and vehicle, start the transaction without having to go through the manual or keyboard entry process. Down to the right, the annual mileage and or the mileage per day. We use that primarily for marketing and follow-up purposes. If you're using the marketing and follow-up and you say, well, you know what, we're going to do that inspection, we're going to do that air filter 15,000 miles after it was done previously, this will use the customer's invoices to determine what their annual mileage and or their miles per day would be. The way it behaves is the very first time we enter in a vehicle, it will set it to 12,000 as an annual mileage, working out to 33 miles a day. It kind of follows the old standard convention of an oil change every 3 months or 3,000 miles. As soon as we have two different data elements, meaning the first invoice was closed on this day with this mileage, the second invoice was closed on this day with this mileage, now we're going to do the math and figure out, well, how many miles did they drive between the two? How many days was it? So what is their average miles per day as well as their average miles per year? In our case, we did year, make, model, and engine. We'll click on OK. It takes me into my estimate window, where I've got John Barlow in his 2008 Nissan Altima, and John's in today because his brakes are squeaking. Now, I've started on what's called the service request tab, and the purpose of this is to facilitate the customer intake process. He said that his brakes were squeaking, so we'll add that in as a note. If I type into this box, once I finish typing, I want to hit save on the left-hand side. You'll notice once I do, my cursor goes away, and that's telling me, or that's my visual cue, that I have saved that, and that will now print on any documents that I'd hand to my technician and or present to the consumer. Down at the bottom, we're going to do a brake evaluation. It's one of my standard inspection items that I've got. So once I check the box, I'll hit Post Labor on the left-hand side. The arrive time defaults to when I click the New Estimate button. Now to the right-hand side, the promise time says, well, we've told Mr. Barlow that we'll have that vehicle back done for him by 5 p.m. So if I'm using promise time to try to keep track and manage workflow, we'll enter that down there in the lower right-hand corner. So we've entered in the information for the customer intake process. Typically now we print a copy of the estimate. Not that I'm charging him any actual monies for performing this inspection, but I at least want to get his signature on a document that says that it was okay for me to do the inspection, as well as potentially drive the vehicle, whatever other legal verbiage we might have outstanding. So again, just the brake evaluation, $0, so no total down there. However, I do want his signature that signs off on here are the different elements that we're including, and we want to make sure that we're getting your approval for as part of this estimate. I'll close back out of here because after my service request tab, the second tab will likely land on is my parts and labor tab, where after doing our inspection, my technicians have determined that we need to replace the front brake pads and machine the rotors. So to do that, we're going to add the parts and labor onto this particular transaction. Now, for at least today's conversation, we're not talking about different catalog integrations, so finding it through Napa or Worldpac, or going into SmartyCat to add that back onto the ticket. Again, different webinars that we're covering more on those different integrations. For our purposes, I just want to add a labor job onto the ticket. So the icon here to the upper left-hand corner that says labor will allow me to add a labor job. I said there were two jobs we were going to do as part of this ticket today for John Barlow. First one's going to be to remove and replace the brake pads. So if I drop my category window down, I'll go down to brakes as a category, and underneath my operation listing, a little down from the top, I've got one to install my front disc brake pads. When I select that, by default, I have that job configured to charge 1 hour's worth of labor, which at my current hourly labor rate of $85 works out to be just $85 as a charge to the consumer. That was job 1 of 2. So at the bottom of this window, I'll hit Next. I'm going to stay in the category of brakes, and the next job we're going to do is we're going to remove and replace, we're going to recondition both front brake rotors in order to fix his 2008 Nissan Altima. I click on that one. That one is 4/10 of an hour, which again times my labor rate of 85 works out to be $34. This was the last labor job we were going to estimate, at least for the time being, for this transaction. So in the lower right-hand corner, we'll click on OK. So we've added those jobs onto the estimate. The one to turn the rotors isn't going to require any parts. However, we want to make sure that we're adding the brake pads on that we're going to use in order to fix this vehicle. So in order for me to do that, there's an icon up here that says Part in the upper left-hand corner. Now I'm going to click on the icon, then I'm going to immediately jump back out. I'll explain why here in just a moment. When I click on the Part icon, when I'm using what I call job-based repair orders, meaning the part wants to know, well, what job do I belong to? Down here at the very bottom, the last drop-down box that I have available at current says Job. What labor line do I tie myself to? In my case, it came up as blank, so I could look through that list and I could define that if I wanted based upon the 3 items that were outstanding. If I was to close back out of there and I highlight the job itself, so in this case, install front disc brake pads, and now click on the part icon, what you'll notice it says, well, because that was highlighted, I know that I'm going to tie myself to that particular part. We're going to add a part onto the system, or onto this, that is coming out of my local inventory. So however I've resourced or figured out that that is the appropriate part that belongs on this vehicle, again, not talking too much about catalog integrations, but that's the part we want to add. I'm going to type in that part number, and then before I click on OK, I'm going to hit the Enter key on the keyboard. I've looked for the part number. It says, well, based upon the string that you've entered, I found this match. It's a part number SS7318X with a line code of SS. The description is a brake pad. The selling price to the consumer, $69.99. If I didn't hit the Enter key, first off, it wouldn't recognize it as a part based upon the combination part number and line code. but I'd have to manually fill in all of the other values that exist in my Edit Part window. I'll click on OK, and now it says, well, based upon the inventory configuration of that particular part, I know my cost, I know my cell, as well as who I'm getting it from, and then also the department that it belongs in. The only thing it's going to want me to fill out before we finalize this transaction is who actually replaced the brake pads. But at this point, all I want to do is click on OK, because I now have a job total of $154.99, parts and labor included, in order to replace the front pads, and then $34 in order to replace the front brake rotors. At this point, we'd likely either print a copy of the estimate again to present to John Barlow, and or if we're picking up the phone and giving him a call, again, I might want to have a hard copy document. So now when we print a copy of the estimate, it's a little bit different in that as opposed to just having that brake evaluation, I now have the labor lines on there to install the front pads and recondition the rotors in addition to the parts that we're going to use as part of that service. Our total now $212.33 if we're going to do that work for John Barlow on his 08 Altima. Get back out of there and I'm back over to my main estimate window. If I wanted to look at the calculations, the split parts and labor, and or the profitability before I talk to John, well, here's my parts total, here's my labor total, and then if I were to click on profit, and now it shows me that at current, I'm at a 60% margin on parts on this transaction based upon those brake pads that we're going to sell to John Barlow. Still 100% margin because I've not assigned a technician yet, and or if I'm not utilizing labor margin inside of the system, it'll still stay at that 100% delta. So we have our different elements that we've added to the estimate for John Barlow. Once he's given the approval to do the work, we're going to convert it. So in the upper right-hand corner, we'll click on Convert. What Convert essentially does is if I hit the X to close out of John Barlow, there he sits in my Estimates in Progress window. When I click on Convert, then it's going to take me from my Estimates in Progress, and if I was to close out again, we'll see him now down at the bottom of my Work in Progress window. So we've got our estimate that we've converted over to a Work in Progress for John Barlow. One other piece before we leave him alone at least for a second, that is, if you notice out to the right-hand side, my very last box there says Approval Needed under the Estimate Authorization column. This is driven by the electronic authorizations that we'll capture inside of the system, meaning if I go back into John Barlow, up here in the top there's a button that says EST Auth, short for Estimate Authorizations, and when I click on that, it says, well, I need to know who gave us the approval, where did we get a hold of them. In this case, we called them at home, so that was the phone number we called. We told them 212.33. The reason we called them was pads and rotors. And then I'm actually the one that picked up the phone to give them a call, so we'll record that electronically. When I click on OK, you'll notice the background of that icon goes from red to gray, and if I was to close out of this transaction, now it shows that it's in green. It's been approved because the last recorded electronic authorization matches the current dollar amount of the transaction. So if you're using electronic authorizations, again, a quick visual cue to tell you whether you have or have not received and recorded that electronic authorization. Time to send John Barlow on his way as we finish up our webinar today. I'm going to double click back on John, hit Finalize in the upper right hand corner. It'll first ask me to validate the mileage. It's a prompt that I've got turned on in configuration. We'll leave the mileage where it was at 112,358 and click on OK. Next tells me that some items must be corrected before we finalize this transaction. Again, the items that are required are user definable. For example, in my case, I mentioned before that it wants to know, well, who was the technician that actually performed the work. So Bart Smith took care of that for replacing the brake pads for John Barlow. Once I select Bart and click on OK, also a configurable option, but in my case it asks, would we like to assign Bart to all parts and labor on this estimate or on this repair work? Essentially what that says is somebody did the evaluation, somebody replaced the brake pads, and somebody turned the rotors. If Bart Smith did all of that, then we'll answer yes to that question, and it won't ask me for each line item individually, well, who did this work? If I answer no to that, it'll continue to ask me, well, who did the evaluation? Who did the brake rotors? And who did the brake pads? We'll say yes, and it will continue and now assign Bart Smith as my technician to all parts in this transaction. It takes me into my payment window. By default, it assumes we're going to take care of the entire tender amount in a single, so the entire amount of the transaction by a single tender type. If that was the case, all I'll have to do is just click on the tender type out here to the right-hand side. So if we're going to take a Visa or MasterCard from John Barlow, we'd hit credit cards, leave Visa MasterCard as the amount. If I wanted, I can capture my last 4 digits, as well as if I'm using a standalone terminal, capturing my authorization. Click on OK, and once we've now told the system here's how we're going to cover the entirety of that 212.33, I can now hit Finalize in the lower right-hand corner. The very first transaction of the month, it'll ask us to allow it to initialize the monthly sales. In my case, just clicking on OK takes me to the prompt that says, do you wish to print the final repair order? Answer yes to that question. We'll print it to the screen. Very similar to what we've seen before, except in this case, as we look down the left-hand side, there's our payment, there's our authorization that we've captured, and then down to the right, the total paid was $212.33, $0 due for this transaction. One last prompt that I've got up there, it says, do you want to schedule an appointment for this customer and vehicle? Again, a user-definable or configurable setting. But in my case, if we're going to do maintenance work, what I'd like to do is schedule that next appointment. Maybe we're going to do an oil change every 90 days, every 6 months. Maybe we've got some declined work that we want to make sure we're getting on the scheduler that the customer comes back, and or we at least call to remind them to come back. But that's the prompt where it asks, do you want to schedule an appointment for this customer and vehicle? I'll click on No to get back to my main screen. John Barlow no longer in my work in progress. He's now archived himself off into history. And if we wanted to recall that transaction, we would do that up to that history icon in the upper left-hand corner. That brings me to the end of my agenda for today's webinar as we talk about ROWriter Basics.